The Sleepers, Chapter 21, Spinning Record. Both Lucius and I changed courses after Sam. I redirected my studies, and Dr. Santos started collecting higher dues for his generous sleep. It was late January, and we'd gone 2 weeks without a single mention of Samantha's letter or her very existence. "As much as I love our scientific discussions," concluded Dr. Santos, "there is more important work to be done for us." He paused, leading me to momentarily doubt our relationship. Had I angered him? I didn't think that possible. Maybe he was reprioritizing me out of his life for lying. Doubts surfaced quickly until he resumed, "I cannot keep you here forever, and graduation will come quickly, even with a change in studies." With this he looked at me with a crooked head and a raised eyebrow. "I'd like you to spend some of your precious time understanding the impact of borrowed sleep on our society." I relaxed, relieved with the thought of extra homework over dismissal. Resisting the wizard was pointless. "If that's how you want me to spend my time, so be it." Hard to refuse, given my time came from him. Imagine if all clients felt that way. Lucius still believed in me and was still willing to invest in my greater development. "What's next?" I asked in anticipation. "Write me a report on the spinning record thesis by Olaf Jorgensen. We'll discuss your findings next week." My stomach growled in complaint as I forced an unconvincing, "Sounds good." Despite my best face, I was sure the wizard knew this was not a favorite topic. I left his office as suppressed memories trampled thin mental walls. Everyone loved the catchy spinning record thesis, except me, having been forced to learn it when very young. My father ardently believed in Jorgensen's work, finding the metaphor especially attractive. When I was 6, I broke my father's antique record player, a device so ancient that repair was pointless. I moved next to the record collection before my exploding father stopped the carnage. Corporal punishment followed. Perhaps this early trauma paved the way for my resentment over Jorgensen's clever metaphor. Studying Jorgensen, I found myself again facing the player and the music. If the world spun like a record, I wanted to scratch the surface. The player may spin, but the music would stop. That became my metaphor, my destiny, to drag the sharpest nail, my devastation device, over each subtle record ridge. I would leave the record warped and irreparable, a symbol of enchantment rendered musicless, a dance of nations now soulless. With Sleep Free's demise, I meant to end the cycle. I had heard enough music. Like all great discoveries, Sleep Free galvanized political scientists into a social framework frenzy. Clever catchphraseologists pursued the perfect words for the paradigm of the century, conveying both colloquial flair and marketable brevity. Nobel officials bestowed the great prize on the Norwegian Olaf Jorgensen for his digestible magnum opus, The World is a Spinning Record. Jorgensen's spinning record was a response and reboot to Friedman's monumental thesis from the early 21st century, The World is Flat. Friedman preached that technology, globalization, opportunities, free trade, and a smattering of democracy leveled the playing field for otherwise non-competitive countries. Jorgensen modified the flat thesis, observing that as opportunity increased, so too did the speed at which new superpowers rose and fell. The playing field may be flat, but the distribution of power was not. He then extended his thesis across history, Sleep Free being just a footnote. Simply stated, his core thesis was that power moves west, technology is its carriage. For marketing purposes, he dressed up his idea with the symbol of the spinning record. If you flatten a sphere, you get a disk. Our disk, this flat world, is spinning like a record, with hegemonic power changing faster and faster. He articulated a 7-act play dramatized from east to west in the spinning world. The great fall, the fallen blame, the blamers moan, the moaners dream, the dreamers build, the builders decline, and the new supplanters become great. History repeats itself. Jorgensen then detailed the accelerating rise and fall of superpower states, while elaborating on his musical symbolism. Nations and cultures oscillate on a slow-frequency, variable amplitude harmonic. Empire builders seek high amplitudes, climbing to precipitous heights and consequently falling to more profound depths. Think ancient China, Rome, and Persia. Conversely, nations like Switzerland remain purposefully close to the baseline. They do not build vast empires, but they do not fall into great decay. Tracing the history of great powers, he marked that the superpower states have trended east to west, with the changes happening faster as technology advanced. With the exception of the Far East, power rose from Babylon and Egypt westward to Greece, then Rome, before the rise of the Germanic states. With the advent of the Renaissance, European superpowers then conquered the world, with the British Empire the shining star. These imperialist empires lasted several hundred years, a fraction of some of their Eastern predecessors, before giving way to the age of America. The American hegemony lasted only 3 generations until it fell to the spinning record, making way for the odd sisterhood of China and India. Technology, expansion, exploration, and globalization are continually shrinking the time a nation or culture can maintain the supreme title before it slips westward again. At the time of Sleep-Free's discovery, mid-21st century, America ached in the early stages of the 7-act play, floundering for life. America had chosen the disastrous steps of Europe, insisting social welfare could pay for itself without increased taxes, higher inflation, and greater debt. Innovation had all but vanished, and North and South America squabbled over countermeasures akin to the defunct European Union. Meanwhile, the Middle East and pockets of Africa had at last awakened, supplying cheap labor and low-skill exports to East Asia as China had once done for America. All 7 acts were strung out around the globe, ready for the next spin. Sleep-Free heralded America's rebirth. Industry and science briefly boomed. Scientists and engineers, energized by sleep, worked longer, breaking the bonds imposed by nature to discover solutions to the great problems of a densely populated world. New technology trickled to new industry, revitalizing small-town plants. Mass production of sleep-free units was just the start. The spinning record skipped a full cycle over Europe and Africa, putting America again on top with Sleep-Free's dissemination. But Jorgensen rightfully predicted the record would keep spinning and do so faster than ever. As he put it, "No country will survive long at the top in a global interwoven economy, driven by resource extraction, riddled with fiscal irresponsibility, and plagued with mass social welfare and redistribution through mega intergovernmental handouts." Since its publication, superpowers rose and fell faster and faster until it became futile to invest in a winner. Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas stole the spotlight faster than detractors could champion isolationism. The Middle East experienced their true Arab Spring when they reinvested all oil profits into the world's uranium sources, securing their global energy reign. But the record spun on. Surging countries shed historic debts, emotional baggage, and self-defeating pity to become storybook successes at the cost of half a society asleep. This was Jorgensen's thesis played out like a symphony. Everyone loved his work, but only one nation listened, his own. Olaf proposed it was time for Norway to break from the cyclical system and flatline, become Switzerland, and survive. Vikings and North Sea crude had previously triggered Norway's 2 great historic peaks. The Danes and oil depletion produced their 2 troughs. Ever meticulous and wise, Norway resisted the immediate allure of sleep-free. When Norway discovered petroleum deposits in the North Sea, they had invested in the great social study to answer one question: what would become of our country and our people? The outcome then was the cautious application of the Nordic model, the balance of the welfare state against capitalism. Just as they researched the effects petroleum would have on their society, Norwegians debated and berated sleep-free's potential impacts. Ultimately, they banned its import and use. Sleep-free might teleport Norway ahead in the game, but Jorgensen's theory would prove such promotion was only temporary. Norway would opt out of this hegemonic circuit, sealing their fate to antiquated fishing and tourism. The rest of the world spun to bimodal ruination, until finally humanity reached equilibrium, embraced sedation by sleep, and suffocated science and true dreams. Malaise poured down from heaven like rotten manna. After a lively discussion on non-synchronous HREM simulation and brainwave pattern transference, Lucius changed subjects, turning to the record and my report. "Don't leave just yet, John." I had slipped away stealthily enough. "Sit back down. We have more to discuss. I may spend a few extra hours sleeping a day to keep you charged, but I still found time to read your essays." He paused, giving no indication whether he was happy or not with my writing. "And?" I questioned, then followed up asking, "Did you like it?" "I don't believe it is a matter of like. There was room for improvement, though it is clear you have studied Jorgensen before, and may carry a bit of cynicism on that front." Lucius looked at me incredulously, his eyes not yet closed. "What I did find interesting was your perception of the timeline." "What do you mean?" I asked sincerely. Standing up, he seemed to change his mind about this conversation. "Let's walk and talk." This was uncharacteristic for sure. Weather was too cold for casual walks, so he grabbed a jacket to match his yellow bow tie. We worked our way down the hall and stairs to the outside in silence, unable to hold this discussion in public. Once away from the crowds, he countered with his own question. "Suppose the rise of sleep was like a revolution. What does a revolution require?" "A powder keg and a spark," I laughed, not yet absorbed into the seriousness of this discussion. Being outside was refreshing, even if it was too early for spring, but it was also somewhat distracting. "That's correct, and I thought you didn't have time for history," he added wryly. Just because I was short on time didn't mean I didn't love history. Lucius continued, keeping a steady pace. "The spark can be so rapid and receive so much attention in history books that we tend to ignore the powder kegs, or at least miscomprehend their development. You're a chemist now, John. Producing black powder takes time and effort." I nodded, well trained in following unwanted and inefficient metaphors. We made our way across one of the many bridges on campus and paused halfway across. "Think of some great sparks, Lexington and Concord, or Fort Sumter, or outside of your own history, the crossing of the Rubicon, the storming of the Bastille, or the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand." I nodded again. If ever I did study history, I focused on wars and revolutions, an artifact of my father's influence. "Most high schoolers know these moments, these sparks. However, studying the details can be cumbersome. Besides, there is so much to cover for American teenagers." Sarcasm soured my mind, and I wanted to reply, especially given the number of mandated brainwashing topics, but I kept silent. "So curriculum sacrifices are made, and events are compressed. Major events might receive a chapter, with the build-up, the powder keg, receiving a page, a paragraph, perhaps just a measly sentence. Depending on the specificity of the class, you may delve deep enough to appreciate building tensions like the Stamp Act or Bleeding Kansas. But from contemporary perspective, the timeline runs together like a beaten egg, with all of the build-up happening at instantaneous speeds. However, to the generation living the transformation, the revolution takes a lifetime." I kept my hands in my pocket for warmth, wishing I had a hat stuffed away in the coat. He looked me over, checked the stream, then decided, "Let's go sit on a bench for a bit." That bench wasn't going to warm us up, but there was a peaceful look to it. Once sitting, he resumed, "A lot can happen to a generation. The colonists experienced the discontent over increased taxation without representation before being pushed to war. Do you think many of them started out hating the British? They were British. Do you think the transformation happened overnight? Similar massive shifts have happened in every culture across the world and throughout history. It is a natural evolutionary process. This is the premise of the spinning record. Nations rise and fall in the 7-act play, as you put it, with our history books focusing on the critical junctions, the first and last acts, and ignoring the middle, the transition. Even if we can pinpoint a single critical event, real historic shifts take time. Consider the rise of American socialism. Who's to say when this transformation started? Late 20th century Republicans blamed the Roosevelts, but neither man sealed the deal. A transformation was happening, and to those living it was slow and even unthinkable how to get from point A to point B. You're going to say the same thing happened with sleep, I suggested. Yes, exactly. When I look at your summary of the spinning record, or recall your somewhat narrow views of Pack Sleep Free, the great piece from your father's company, and I'm not saying they are wrong, it appears you think this all happened overnight. That is the way of mortals, to perceive previous generations as a blip, a footnote. But Sleep Free did not conquer the world overnight. To really understand Pack Sleep Free, you might want to start with the Great Depression, or at least FDR. But for sake of this discussion, let's focus on the financial crises 80, 90 years ago. They devastated American families. The lower classes sunk to unthinkable depression levels. The middle class collapsed, and spurious printing of worthless dollars couldn't save us. We had hit the bottom of the cycle. Politics was absurdly divisive and comical. Then came along Sleep Free. I fidgeted, eager now to speak, nearly jumping off the bench. That's what I'm talking about, I interjected, excited to now see this conversation run full circle. Sleep Free comes along, and everyone jumps on the train, giving up freedoms in life without a second thought. I had pushed my gentle master, and he closed his eyes at last to collect his thoughts and curb my impertinence. From your perspective, yes, such a change may have occurred, but it was not so. People don't give up freedom lightly. The American cowboy is difficult to suppress. The sleep change you speak of took 20 years, perhaps longer, and really only solidified before you were born. There was life before sleep, even my childhood, and its rise, though apparently meteoric to today's young, took time. It began with the very wealthy and the hiring of immigrants. The demand for sleepers could only grow as fast as Sleep Free could grow, and as people could afford the units. As companies paid for the best minds to have sleepers, then the American economy began to recover in the face of innovation, combined of course with the gradual spread of Sleep Free to other nations, and taxes on foreign revenue. As the economy recovered, and as the technology was perfected, more individuals could afford sleepers. And so the sleeper class rose, but it was not instantaneous. The sleep class transitioned from immigrants to native poor and jobless as we better understood dream transference. My look must have betrayed cynicism, so he clarified. Not the laziest of Americans, as some suspect. No, the next wave of sleepers were the truly desperate, the class of women and men that have knocked on every door and applied for every job. These were the poor beaten by too many crises, pandemics, downturns, and layoffs, unable to find work, or enough work, no matter the sacrifice. At last an opportunity presented itself, and they took it. This transformation included tranches of working groups, jobless as their industries vanished, single moms scraping to supplement scanty welfare checks, and hard-working young adults finding the American dream cost more than they could stomach. A group of students moved past. We must have been near the top of the hour, but Lucius would not finish this conversation until his point was made. As the client class expanded, we needed more and more sleepers. We were headed toward the bimodal distribution. The net expanded, catching all classes of disadvantaged individuals. Eventually, government policy on who qualified for welfare, given the obvious ease of the way, forced the last group of individuals, the very lazy or those with no ambition, to sleep. Every group could find the workload doable, and the sustained paycheck a godsend. From your perspective, it happened overnight, but this transformation took many years. But what about the American dream? I blasted. There is no hope here. I couldn't keep my cool forever, ignoring my real feelings about Sleep Free. Hope is an easy thing to discuss when you were born in the wealthiest sleeper family of all time, John. The desire for change or advancement did not die in a day. These families were broken and chose security and stability over street corners and desperate meal-to-meal living. Is that not the American dream? I couldn't stop thinking about the powder keg. It didn't seem the right analogy, not now anyway. Times change, Dr. Santos. Transformations and revolutions are forgotten in a generation or two. The Great Depression spawned a generation of savers, but their children or children's children shook off that Puritan discipline and went back to spending. Perhaps the same thing will happen with sleepers. Perhaps they cannot happily sleep forever. 1 or 2 generations wounded by crisis can revert back. They will demand opportunity again, and choice. Frowning, Lucius contemplated my argument. He rose, and I followed as we started walking back. Again on the bridge, he countered. I hate to say it, but hence, Pax, sleep free. Politicians work small victories to keep everyone happy. But maybe the Great Depression is a bad example. Look at the first American Revolution instead. Some changes cannot and will not be undone. We did not go back to being British colonists. Some transformations are permanent, at least over a finite period of centuries. I believe that's where we are with sleep, and it will take us many more years before there's a new powder keg, let alone a spark. That unfortunately made more sense, but I couldn't believe it. I needed to undo sleep. Real lasting revolution or not. I shook my head, unwilling to fight or hear more. Interpreting my shake as frustration at the system and not disagreement, Dr. Santos mercifully ended the conversation. Thank you, John, for the good discussion. It's been too long since I have been so worked up. The cold air might be good for us. We finished the walk quietly, passing more students the closer we got to his office. The workday had passed, and I excused myself after yet again being sucked into a time warp with the wizard. Lucius may not have believed change was imminent, but he was out of touch. He spent his life in the lab with the brightest and most ambitious minds, and very few sleepers. But there was discontent. I could feel it. I was evidence. The powder keg was there, and my drug would be the spark. A revolution would come, and Cumulus would end this music.